It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? The Great Trash War of 2025. But this really happened. A bizarre, high-stakes conflict that erupted across the US-Canada border. And no, it wasn't a war over land or oil, it was a war over garbage.
So, you have to be asking yourself, how on earth did millions of tons of everyday household trash become a geopolitical weapon? How did it spark a crisis that escalated all the way to the US Supreme Court? Well, let's get into it. To really wrap your head around this, you have to understand the sheer scale of this relationship. We're talking about 3.44 million tons. That's how much trash flows south from just one Canadian province, Ontario, into the United States, every single year. For decades, it was this massive, quiet, and efficient system running in the background of everyone's lives.
So why? Why was all this garbage crossing an international border? Well, it wasn't an accident. This cross-border habit, this river of refuse, was built on something really simple and really powerful: economics.
Look, it really all boils down to simple math. In Ontario, landfills were getting packed, and that made getting rid of trash more expensive. But right next door, in Michigan, they had plenty of space and, get this, an unbelievably low disposal fee, just 36 cents a ton. If you're a waste management company, it's a no-brainer.
Now, for years and years, a lot of people in Michigan were, not exactly thrilled about being the destination for all this Canadian trash. But their hands were tied because of a powerful piece of American law called the Commerce Clause. It basically says states can't block trade. And as weird as it sounds, garbage is legally considered trade because money is exchanged for the service of getting rid of it. So trash gets treated like any other product. Cars, lumber, you name it. A state can't just put up a roadblock.
And this whole situation was basically set in stone back in 1992. A Supreme Court case called Fort Garadio officially declared that garbage is an article of commerce. That ruling made it literally unconstitutional for Michigan to just ban trash from outside the state. The door was legally locked open.
And then 2025 happened. Everything changed. All the economic and legal rules that have governed this trade for decades were about to get completely shattered by an executive order.
And let me tell you, this happened fast. On February 1st, 2025, the Trump administration used something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to slap a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, and they made sure to explicitly include garbage. Then, by August 1st, that tariff was jacked up to a staggering 35%. And make no mistake, this wasn't some broad accidental thing. The administration targeted a very specific customs code, HS code 382510. That's the official classification for municipal solid waste. All of a sudden, regular old garbage trucks became instruments of reciprocal pressure in a massive international trade war.
So this tariff wall goes up, and boom, the effect in Canada was immediate and huge. For the province of Ontario, this wasn't just some economic inconvenience. This was a full-blown crisis.
This chart really tells the whole story. With more than a quarter of all its landfill waste being sent to the U.S., these tariffs suddenly slammed shut a critical escape valve. The pressure started building at home, and it started building fast.
And here's the real kicker. They were on a ticking clock. Projections showed that without those U.S. landfills, Ontario would completely run out of its own landfill space by 2034. The province was staring down the very real possibility of having literally nowhere to put its garbage.
You can just hear the urgency in this quote from Steve Pinsonalt, a member of provincial parliament. He laid out the government's thinking perfectly. They were facing a potential disaster, and they argued they had to take drastic measures to build up Ontario's own capacity, and they had to do it now. So what was this drastic measure? It was a piece of legislation called Bill 5, and it was designed to do one thing: get landfills built fast by overriding normal rules. It specifically targeted a proposal for a new mega landfill in a town called Dresden and just revoked the requirement for a full environmental assessment to speed things up. As you can probably guess, that sparked fierce, passionate opposition from local groups.
Okay, so while Ontario is in panic mode, scrambling to build new landfills, Michigan was playing a totally different game. Since they couldn't legally ban the trash, Governor Gretchen Whitmer's administration came up with a really clever economic countermove.
I mean, that 36-cent fee in Michigan was just absurdly low. Look at Ohio right next door, charging almost $5. The governor's proposal was to raise Michigan's fee to $5 a ton. The goal was simple:
Make it so Michigan is no longer the cheapest option, and maybe the trucks will stop coming.
And this is where the strategy gets really brilliant from a legal perspective. The key was that this new $5 fee would apply to everyone. Waste from inside Michigan, waste from Ohio, waste from Ontario. Since it wasn't discriminating, it was designed to be a perfectly legal way around that Commerce Clause problem that had been frustrating the state for decades.
So, you've got both sides making these huge, aggressive moves. The conflict was spiraling. It wasn't just about trash anymore. It was a full-blown trade war, and the whole thing was heading for a final, dramatic showdown.
Now, Canada wasn't just going to sit there and take it. They decided to retaliate. They targeted a critical U.S. import, electricity. A 25% surcharge was slapped on power exported to the States, basically showing that two could play the tariff game, and seriously raising the economic stakes for everyone involved. And then, in February of 2026, the entire chessboard got flipped over. In a landmark case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the president did not actually have the authority under that IEEPA law to impose these kinds of tariffs. Just like that, the central legal pillar of the entire trade war completely crumbled. The reaction was immediate. Michigan Congresswoman Haley Stevens, for example, called the decision a victory for the rule of law. For many, it wasn't just about trade. It was seen as a really important check on the power of the president to set trade policy all on their own. So, the tariffs vanished. The Great Trash War was officially over. But, and this is a big but, the end of the fighting didn't actually solve any of the underlying problems. It just left behind this really uneasy truce.
So let's just recap where things stand. Ontario still has that ticking clock on its landfill space. That crisis hasn't gone away. And Michigan's proposal to raise its fees, it hasn't passed, which means it's still the cheapest dump around. All of these core issues are basically just waiting to be fought over again during the next big review of the North American trade deal, the USMCA.
Which really brings us to the final big question, doesn't it? The Great Trash War of 2025 is over. For now. But with all of the fundamental economic and environmental pressures still simmering right below the surface, you just have to ask yourself, is this piece really built to last?